So, it's pretty interesting. I actually ran by the local general store after the game yesterday, and look what I got. As you can see here, uno dos. And I decided to get not one, but two of the Raiders Cups, including one in quite a bit of disarray, but regardless of the Dennis Allen era, it doesn't count. It's because by now we all know Raiders always go for two. And what can I say about about the New Orleans game? Just incredible and absolute, just pulse pounder from start to finish. I had like 5 heart attacks throughout that game. And one thing is that I looked at, and there's a lot of bad to come from this game as well as good. I mean, obviously the Raiders came back and they won 35-34 and we're ecstatic about that. Not to say that there aren't some huge gaping problems with this team that were observable throughout that game. I'll talk about those in a bit. But just looking at how the team won this, I was doing some research earlier, and this is the first time the Raiders have actually mounted a comeback from more than 14 points against while on the road since, pardon me, I'm getting choked up, since a 2000 game against the Indianapolis Colts when Peyton Manning was in his, second, third year as a player. So, first time the Raiders have done anything like that in years and years and years. 16, 17 to be exact. And just that kind of gives you an indication where the team's headed because, 2 years ago, this team would have lost this game by like 14 points, but they came mounting back. They soldiered everybody. They got together. As bad as the defense was, the offense really went out there and just marshaled everybody and got the thing going, and we saw some guys rise to the occasion. Jalen Richard came in there with that 75-yard run, which we really, really needed. We saw Seth Robert drill in the almost game winner. We saw Michael Crabtree go in there and just reel it in and getting the victory for the Raiders. And I know, it's one of those things where it's a 50-50. I know there's an alternate route out there where they go for the 2-point conversion, it fails, and instead of being praised as like some, maverick, Jack Del Rio, there's probably like people taking huge dumps in his doorstep right now, saying, how could you possibly go for 2? Why didn't you just kick the extra point, go into overtime? But, like you said, he goes in there to win, just win, baby. That is the Raiders' mantra. And it's a risky move, but this time around it paid off. Now, the thing is, the reason why he did that was because, quite frankly, the Raiders' defense sucked yesterday. Let's see what the official stats are here. They allowed 423 passing yards. Drew Brees had 4 touchdowns. Both Willie Snead and Brandon Cooks both had over 140 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns combined. But here's the thing, even though they had all that, even though they had 423 yards and they had all these aerial touches, and even though the Raiders committed, 14 penalties for about 140 yards, gave up that many just in penalties alone, despite all of that, they still won. And the variable there is you got to ask yourself, what did they do differently? What about this setup gave them the opportunity to win, whereas in years past they would have lost, and they would have lost horribly? And for me, this game is very reminiscent of that Pittsburgh game from last year. It's kind of the inverse, where this time around, instead of the Raiders like faltering at the very end, they actually come back and win it. But looking at this game, the thing that really struck me, and this is a key number you need to take into consideration, and that number is going to be 167. What is that? That's the number of rushing yards the Raiders had. Now, of course, a lot of that has to do with Jalen Richard, saunter for 75 yards. But you look at that, and your New Orleans only had 88. What I'm noticing is that for years and years, the Raiders, even last year, I think, were kind of set up as being a pass-to-run team, which is you get Amari Cooper the ball, you get like the long strike, and then you send in Marcel Reese, you send in Latavius, and you just punch it in from 5 yards out and get 7 on the board. But I think when you look at guys like DeAndre Washington, you look at Jalen Richard, you look at Tywan Jones, you just look at like this huge, running back by committee that the Raiders have. They can change their entire offensive scheme. This is a team that can go in there and actually play run to pass now. That you can go in there and run on the first 2 downs, set up Amari Cooper, get 15-yard chunks, and all of a sudden you become an entirely different dynamic offense. And I think that really bodes well for the Raiders. I think that's where I'd like to see them go. And having a good run game That's the key variable for if you want to be a successful NFL team. Because let's face it, everybody's going to put up 300 yards. I mean, you see that week in, week out. It's a passing league. The difference is, do you have a really great defense? And frankly, just looking at the score fest we've had over the weekend, that's not really a trend in the NFL anymore. It's about being able to run the ball. Can you keep it going? And, almost always, that's the thing. New Orleans, they had 100 more receiving yards than the Raiders did, but the Raiders had, twice as many rushing yards. And who won the game? The Raiders. Now it's for the bad. Now I'm ecstatic. I love the fact that we went for 2. We won the game. But the thing is, the defense sucked. I mean, this is a team where you just went in there and they just let guys like Willie Snead and Brandon Cooks just run all over them. I mean, you had that 98-yard touchdown run, which should not have happened. Totally blown coverage. You're seeing a lot of bad stuff coming up front. I mean, it's not like these guys are getting torched on the long pass. Well, I mean, they're being torched on getting pass interference on the long pass. The problem is you're seeing like these really short, like within, the 10-yard range that you're seeing against Drew Brees, where the Raiders the coverage just completely collapsed. They could not cover these dudes. I mean, you saw Sean Smith. That one, blown coverage of his was so bad he got benched. Reggie Nelson, he did pretty good. He was getting some tackles in the backfield. But a lot of your guys, Malcolm Smith did pretty well. Khalil Mack, doing pretty good, getting some solo tackles. And obviously Bruce Irvin, he's your MVP. I mean, he's the guy who got that strip sack at the beginning of the game. See more of that. But just looking at the rest of the defense, I mean, David Amerson, DJ Hayden, for God's sake, just not really living up to it. And we got to see these guys play a whole lot better heading forward. And, of course, the big thing, we saw Menelik Watson go down. Austin Howard's on injured reserve. So we had to see basically the Raiders play the last 2 quarters of this game with a cobwebbed offensive line and doing surprisingly well. I mean, we put a lot of money for the O-line, and it's showing. Derek Carr did not get sacked once. There were no interceptions by the Raiders. Why? Because he had time in the pocket. You have that really good protection. I think that bodes well for the Raiders. And Derek Carr, you got to give this dude credit. This guy's a pimp. This guy is a Jesus-loving pimp because he's out there making the Superman dive, just hooking up with dudes, making plays that you really haven't seen for the Raiders since the heyday of Rich Gannon. So I'm excited about that. Question about the O-line, how are they going to restructure that? What are you going to do? Is Austin Howard going to be healthy enough to play? Who do you have possibly filling in if that doesn't work out? So that's a big question mark. But just from what we've seen, against the Saints, and the Saints really aren't known for having a good defense, obviously. But they held up pretty well. I'm quite impressed. So what do we need to do? Heading in, we got a game against the Falcons on Sunday. I'm optimistic. I mean, as long as the Raiders can keep putting on points. It's one of those things where, you can give up 36 points a game as long as you put up 50 with your offense. And I kind of think that's where we're headed as the Raiders. I mean, the defense, obviously, they need to kind of work on that, show some signs of improvement. And I think they will. We saw the team get way, way better late last season than they did at the beginning of the season. So we'll see. The first crop of games should be pretty easy by and large. Atlanta, not that good of a team. Baltimore, Tennessee, all teams going through really awkward transitions. The San Diego, I think, is the 5th game on the schedule. So, I mean, these are all games that feasibly the Raiders, if they're not going to win, they should at least be competitive. So, I mean, 5-0 seems a little unrealistic, but you know what? Hope springs eternal. Or if you're a Raiders fan, hope falls eternal. So there we go. I'm excited about the win. It's always great. First time Raiders have won a home opener, or not home opener, season opener in 5 years. Derek Carr looked great. O-line looked great. Looks like we have a run game again. That's great. Amari Cooper getting all those yards. How many yards did he have in the game? 137 on 6. Just got to get him in the end zone. If he can hold the ball, we're set for a long time. Playoffs are coming. But yeah, just work on the defense. I mean, stopping the run. They've been pretty well. But yeah, it's getting those 10-yard passes. Keeping those completions, which should not be more than like 8 or 10 yards, from becoming 49-yard runs. That's the problem, and that's what the Raiders got to work on heading in the next game against the Falcons, because they got some good receivers. They can torch you, but the defense is also pretty bad with the Falcons, so let's see what Derek Carr can do. Should be a fun game. But yeah, that's it. Week 1, Raiders win 35-34. Still some things to be worried about, but for the first time in a long, long time, the positives outweigh the negatives. And I, for one, cannot wait for the rest of the season. Go Raiders.